the side I don't recognise, but we'll get to that. We've got a bit of time before we need to worry about that. Ooh, right, order. I call Marcia de Cordova to move the motion.
Thank you, and I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of church and religious buildings in our communities. And Sir Jeremy, it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Along with the Right Honourable Member for Salisbury, I am pleased to have secured this important and timely debate. Today I speak with two hats, as the MP for Battersea and as the Second Church Estates Commissioner. Sir Jeremy, it is undeniable that churches and religious buildings have a positive impact on our communities in constituencies across the country, and it is my intention to share examples of this throughout my debates. As our churches such as St Mary's in Battersea are doing valuable work in their communities every day of the week, with their contributions often delivered at no cost to the state, but with such a great return for the communities in which they are served. It is part of their vocation to serve, their desire to reflect the values of Jesus Christ through their faith, love, hospitality and service to their neighbours. So I hope this debate will allow us to recognise the incredible work of our local churches and other religious organisations. A parish church is often central to the community and is a hub around which a village, town or city has grown. It gives a great sense of place. Indeed, parishes have a specific duty to serve all their community, regardless of faith, background or affiliation. Our churches are not just there for Sunday services, indeed they are active 7 days a week. And Sir Jeremy, here I must declare my own interest in the church that I attend, which is Holy Trinity Clapham, or HTC. It is a Grade 2 listed building supporting the needs of its communities, from services for victims of domestic violence, providing young people's families support services, serving breakfast to over 200 people every week. And like HTC, all Church of England churches and cathedrals support more than 31,000 social action programmes annually and deliver more than 14,000 of these projects themselves, with others projects being hosted by churches carried out in partnership and supported by either volunteers or donations. The National Churches Trust House of Good Research, which I hope my honourable friend the Minister has seen, clearly shows a community benefit, that for every £1 invested in any church, the community sees its return of over £16. And dare I ask, where else could a government get a return like this? While worship is a core activity of the church, they do so much more. They are pillars for community, social action, culture and heritage. They support the national economy, offer apprenticeships for key trade and craft skills, and are collectively one of the largest commissioners of the arts in the UK. They are drivers of regeneration and placemaking. They are well on their way to achieving net zero by 2030 across all their buildings. They are involved in running or supporting food banks, supporting groups for the elderly, the vulnerable, parent and toddler groups, and these are often in places where they are most needed, warm spaces during the winter. In fact, in Battersea, St Peter's, St Michael's, St Barnabas and Ascension Church host a night shelter during the winter months, and I had the pleasure of visiting these night shelters this last winter. So, Jeremy, the UK has 15,000 historic listed places of worship in use across all faiths and denominations, so that's churches, chapels, synagogues, mosques and temples. Approximately 12,500 of these are Church of England churches and cathedrals. And in the last decade, the number of listed places on the Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register has increased to 969, and 911 of these churches are Church of England buildings. Now, here I will now turn to the listed places of worship grant scheme. This was first introduced by the last Labour government under the then Chancellor Gordon Brown, and this scheme has been a lifeline for maintaining these buildings. And while the Church welcomes the continuation of the scheme for an additional year, The reduction from £42 million to £23 million per year and the new cap of £25,000 per place of worship jeopardises the ongoing future of many projects. Now, we know that 94% of applications are under the £25,000 cap and won't be affected. However, 260 Church of England churches will be. And although this just makes up 6% of claims on the scheme, the impact will be huge. The retrospective implementation of the new scheme is causing immense difficulty and preventing responsible budgeting or commissioning work as part of multi-year refurbishment schemes and good stewardship of these buildings. It is preventing craft businesses such as masons, glaziers from taking on apprentices as they are unable to guarantee work, and obviously it is adversely affecting our communities, particularly those most in need of support. So, there's no doubt that we need a long-term solution beyond the year-on-year extension. And this is something that we have... Yes.
Honourable Lady, to give way, and we've had a number of exchanges in the chamber over this issue. In her role as Church Commissioner, given the things she said, the concerns that she's raised about the projects failing, craftsmen being put out of work, has she had any reassurance from the government that schemes that had already started, even if they are above the 25,000 current cap, will be allowed to continue to progress so that these projects can continue?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he's absolutely right. We have had many exchanges, and he will know that I'm firmly committed to ensuring that we get this scheme extended, but more importantly, that those other schemes that are in train will be protected, and I will be coming on to that shortly. But it really is time to give stability and certainty to these measures, to these treasures of our built heritage. I won't list all 260 churches as we do not have time, but there are churches like my own church, Holy Trinity Clapham, and they have been raising funds for vital repairs designed to make our church more accessible to the local community. And as part of the total project, they have raised over £6.2 million. And as I've said earlier, they provide local communities with huge amounts of support, whether that is advice and support and advocacy on debt, providing hot meals, and also sport and social activities. Other examples include the Sunderland Minster. Again, this is grade 2 and has a long-standing ministry to refugees and asylum seekers, holds drop-in and collection days for food, clothes and children toys. Or Hallows by the Wall London hosts a young persons programme in its nave which for 30 years has supported thousands of challenging and excluded young people across the city into work. Then there's Wells Cathedral through its Warm Rail initiative, which is providing free donated clothes, winter coats, and is doing so much more in terms of providing a warm space and offering hot refreshments. And it's also worth noting that lots of churches additionally supported the Warm Welcome campaign in response to the cost of living crisis. Now, Sir Jeremy, I share these examples to show the significant impact these churches are having socially and economically. And I know the government recognises their impact and wouldn't want to see any listed places no longer able to continue to make their vital contributions to communities within which they are serving. Yes.
Giving way. I think she's making a very eloquent account of how churches active in communities can have such an impact. But the other thing is those religious buildings that are no longer being used for religious purposes. And in Scotland, the Church of Scotland is divesting itself of a number of churches, including in East Newcan, my constituency. Does she agree with me that what we need to do is, even if they're not being used for religious purposes, we need to ensure that they continue to be the community hubs that she describes, and that governments need to support that?
And I thank the honourable member for her intervention. She raises a really important point because, as I say, yes, churches are a place of worship, but they do so much more in their communities.
Yes. And may I also thank her for the work she does on behalf of the church. It's a very important role she occupies, and it's one which, in which she commands considerable respect for what she's been doing. May I add to the point just made about the closure, particularly of rural parish churches, which is becoming an increasing problem. One of the things that we have experienced in my constituency is a difficulty in getting the church to recognise that it too has an obligation to stand by the side of local communities when these wonderful and precious buildings are to be closed as places of worship, and help them find a community purpose for it. The church can't ignore its responsibility. Does she also agree with that?
You won't be surprised to hear that I fully agree with what you're saying. So, Sir Jeremy, I will turn to some of the work that the church is also doing. So the church commissioners are already contributing considerable sums from their funds to provide grants to Church of England dioceses and supporting many projects, particularly in those underserved communities. And the Buildings for Mission project has provided £9 million to dioceses for 35 locally based church building support officers and grants to minor repairs and improvements. And through the Cathedral Sustainability Fund, the Church Commissioners has been providing £30 million of targeted funding for these cathedrals since 2017. But I will say that no one organisation can provide this on its own. We all need to be pulling and working together to support these treasures. Now, I bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, or other grant funders, may also rely on the listed places of worship scheme for match funding. And last year, the Heritage Fund announced £100 million to support places of worship over the next 3 years. And parish giving continues to also be a form of support locally. But I say this again, this will not be enough to support every church to undertake its necessary work. Now, aside from the social and economic impact, these buildings contribute to the creative and performing arts space. Churches are providing hundreds of locations for amateur and professional arts of all genres for the government's Arts Everywhere initiative. And finally, England's heritage generates a £45.1 billion gross value-added impact, supporting over 500,000 jobs. And our cathedrals attract millions of visitors, fostering local economies and preserving our cultural heritage. And I'm sure my right honourable friend for Salisbury will be touching on this in his remarks. So in closing, I'd like to ask the Minister, does he agree that our churches make an invaluable contribution to our communities? And will he raise with his colleagues in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport 3 key things that a government could do to support these valuable community assets? First, make the listed places of worship scheme permanent, without a cap, for each place of worship beyond March 2026. We know that it's vital that these churches are supported to continue to serve their communities. Second, prioritise support for projects that are already underway and or for which contracts were signed before the cap was introduced. You would have heard in my remarks, Minister, that I had highlighted a number of churches that are in that position, and the overall figure is estimated at 260 places. Third, gentlemen? Yes.
I'm grateful to her and for giving way. And on that second point, would that include, for example, All Saints Muddyford, where the church was burnt down some 2 years ago, and there's a rebuilding process underway, and they can't at the moment start that because of the extra burden of VAT, and they're raising money for it. But would that be included in the second point she made to the Minister?
Thank you, and I thank the honourable member for his contribution as well. And if this particular church is on the 260 list that I have, then it would be. But I'm very happy for him to follow up with me after, so we can look into that. And my third and final point on this issue is for the government to consider establishing a new capital funding scheme for listed places of all faiths and denominations. And my final point, actually, Sir Jeremy, I would now like to ask the Minister, my honourable friend, if he would actually also, when he's liaising with the department, ministers in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, agree to meet with me and a few churches that are actually affected by the changes to the listed places of worship scheme, to listen to their experiences and see how we can find a solution and a way forward. Because I think we can all agree, if we don't find a way forward, the impact will be great. Thank you.
To the Honourable Lady, can I remind all backbench colleagues that they should continue to stand if they still wish to be called to speak in the debate. The question is that this House has considered the impact of churches and religious buildings on communities. John Glenn.
Thank you, and I'd like to start by commending my friend, the member for Battersea, for opening today's debate. It is obviously a co-sponsored debate, and could I also say what a pleasure it is to serve under you, Sir Jeremy. This is a really useful and important opportunity for colleagues across the House to draw attention to the considerable impact that churches and church buildings play in their communities. But I want to make 3 points around the listed places of worship grant scheme, reflect on and amplify some of the points that the Honourable Lady has made around the impact, the social impact that church buildings have, and then also spell out some of the opportunities that I think the government could look into with respect to capital grants. But before I do that, I wanted to reflect a little bit on what the Honourable Lady said about her own church, Holy Trinity Clapham. The rector vicar of that church is a personal friend of mine going back 25 years, Jago Wynne. And let's not underestimate the leadership role that many of these vicars play in, outside their core remit of preaching the gospel, to actually raise funds to maintain and extend the mission of their church. And this is a church that obviously next year will celebrate 250 years. It's rooted in the Clapham sect. And Jago said to me this morning, this is a mission project so that the building can be a blessing to the community, not a barrier. And it now finds itself £1 million short because of the changes to the terms of the listing places of worship scheme. Now, I'll come on to say a little bit more about that, but as the Honourable Lady has set out, there are 260 other churches that are facing these challenges. They've undertaken a considerable fundraising effort. The works are underway, and now they face a deficit. Now, some may be able to meet the gap, but others possibly won't. Now, I'm very privileged in Salisbury. I live in the shadow of the cathedral. I worship at St Paul's, where I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to reflect on the words that you've just said. My 3 brothers spent many happy years as choristers at Salisbury Cathedral. Churches are, as the Honourable Lady said, the backbone of our communities, and as she also said, some 969 in England alone are at risk due to crumbling roofs and vanishing heritage funding. Recently, my party has been famously mocked for fixing church roofs, so I can only surmise that the more Liberal Democrat MPs there are around, the better. Having said that, instead of leaving congregations and communities up and down the country seemingly praying for a miracle, would the Minister comment on whether the government will commit to making the listed places of worship's grant scheme permanent and removing its cap?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady. I'm not trying to avoid making party political points, but she does tempt me, because where I go to church in St Paul's in Salisbury, where my grandmother went to church 100 years ago, we recently had a win in the local elections over a member of her own party, and that says something about the commitment that Chris Taylor has to St Paul's community. But there are so many churches in Salisbury that I visited where, St Mark's, St Mary and St Nicholas Church, the famous Italianate church in Wilton, where the Reverend Mark Wood does a fantastic job, where we're seeing growth in the congregations, but we're also seeing anxiety all the time about how the fabric of these buildings can be maintained. These buildings are integral to the vibrancy of the communities that they serve. They're a source of great encouragement. They're a convening point for community activities. that have a big impact across all age groups. Now, I'm very happy to give way.
About the community activities is ever present in my own constituency of Carlisle, so I profoundly agree with him. It's some almost 35 years since St James's Church in Carlisle, which is the church I was christened into, set up an op shop in the community of Denton Home to repay the loan it had taken to expand its parish centre. Now, I'm delighted to say that op shop remains today. It's been joined by a coffee shop, which is a real community hub in Denton Home. But more than that, the Diocese of Carlisle took on that op shop model, and today there are 5 shops, and they are all specifically located in communities on our larger estates in and around Carlisle, where there is real need. But more than that, it's not just the goods that they are selling, it's the fact that they've got a model there that is very much about outreach into those communities. So does he agree with me that the ability of our churches to diversify and innovate is one of their great strengths?
Before the honourable gentleman responds, I observe interventions are getting progressively longer. And if those who want to speak are going to be able to speak, we will have to have shorter interventions. John Clare.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. And I acknowledge the Honourable Lady's point. I think the point is that every member who's present today will have a vivid portrait in their own mind of an impact a church makes in their own community. And it is quite different in different places. And it evolves according to the needs of that community. And I won't go through every single one that I visited over my 15 years as Salisbury's MP, but the range and depth of their impact is considerable. Now, Andrew Rumsey, the Bishop of Ramsbury, a bishop in the Diocese of Salisbury, is the co-lead, coincidentally, on church buildings for the Church of England, which has 16,000 buildings, 42 cathedrals, 300 major parish churches, and 12,500 are listed. And that is nearly half of Grade 1 listed buildings in our country. And contrary to elsewhere in Europe, in France and Germany and Italy, there is no central church funding for building works. So whilst it will always be right that people look to the local community to raise funds, we have got to examine what we've done in the past and what we might do in the future, given the role that churches play and church buildings play in essentially being a delivery vehicle for community services alongside local authorities, and how we can embed that understanding in public policy so that actually they are supported and become a sustainable force into the future. Now, let me tend to the first point that I wanted to, which is the listed places of worship scheme. Now, the member for Rhondda and Ogmore did give an assurance around the continuity for 1 year. And I suspect that's probably related to the spending review, which I think on the 11th of June we will have some clarity over what's happening on a multi-year basis. And that can't come soon enough. But the point has been made about these 260 buildings that are in process and outside the cap. And I think that really is something that the government needs to address. And typically, this excellent scheme that Gordon Brown set up in 2001 was underspent. I remember being a chief secretary, seeing that the line was 42 million and it was usually in the 20s. So obviously that money will be netted off at the end of the year. But this is something that is so valued. It seems that to stop those 260 buildings, putting them at risk of not achieving what they need to complete these works, is something that the government must, I respectfully say, reconsider, so that we're not left with that deficit. Now, in my own constituency, I think it's 93,855 in the last year. This is a considerable amount of money. It makes a lot of difference on individual projects, and that will have covered 15 or 20.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Very happy to give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Can I just highlight to him the case of the Church of St Mary Magdalene in Stockton, Bristol, in my constituency? They've been planning since 2019 for extensive repairs and to turn the church into a community hub. And due to the changes in the listed worship scheme, they find themselves £300,000 short. Would he agree with me that that's an enormous sum for a small community to raise?
It is, and I wish them well. I wish St Mary and their parishioners well in all their endeavours. But I do think there's scope for the government to come out of this in a very positive way in June by actually looking back over what they can do to put this right. My second point, I want to spend a few moments just asserting the impact that church buildings have on local communities. The Honourable Lady mentioned the House of Good report, and one of my constituents, Luke March, has been working for 10 years as chairman of the body that put that report together, the National Churches Trust. And it does make for interesting reading. We're talking about enormous support for communities working with local authorities. And this National Churches report talks about the care to those in need worth twice as much as the total spend on adult social care by local authorities. And I think there's a risk, and I recognise this myself, given my ministerial experience, to say, well, this is going to happen anyway. So, therefore, we can bank that and then worry about what our actual budget is overall. But I think the Minister must recognise that there is often, and he will know from his own constituency, the synergy that exists between statutory funded local authority provision and the provision of churches working together. We need to look at embedding that understanding in policy making. Now, the Honourable Lady mentioned the value of church buildings as a source of encouragement, as a source of fun in arts and cultural experiences. And I obviously recognise that massively overlooking Salisbury Cathedral with their Flower Festival this week, Sarum Lights, the numbers of visitors to Evensong, the Darkness into Light, all of these things. 62% of church spaces are useful for leisure time music performances and are used as such. But then there's the other side, the food banks, the warm spaces, a venue for Alcoholics Anonymous, for debt counselling, for grief counselling, for youth clubs, and for parish meetings. And last year, the Khan report gave an independent review into social cohesion and resilience. And it focused, understandably, as the Minister will know, on the financial vulnerability of councils. But again, I just want to reinforce, churches can surely be effective, investable vehicle to deal with some of these deficits. And putting right this issue with the grant scheme can give more security to more buildings going forward. And the Centre for Social Justice, in its report, Pillars of Community, asserts that 12 out of their 29 policies, community thriving, is supported by the presence and role of churches. Now, the third and final point I'd like to make, Sir Jeremy, is around capital grants. Because I think that there's a considerable precedent here, but I feel myself being anxious as a former Chief Secretary to that constant demand for more money, and I recognise that. But we did find money in 2014 to 18 with the World War I Cathedral Repairs Fund. That meant that 57 Anglican and Catholic cathedrals benefited. The Roof Repairs Fund, over a similar time frame, gave 55 million, administered by the National Heritage Memorial Fund. And the Heritage Stimulus Fund gave grants for programmes of major works as part of the Cultural Recovery Fund after COVID in 2 tranches in 21 and 22. Now, the public finances are clearly challenged, but I do think there's enormous willingness in many communities where government are doing something to match that funding. And there is an enormous opportunity for a multiplier effect. It's usually easier to secure capital funding than revenue funding. And so I would urge the Minister to say, look, when he plans his budget and finalises what's happening in these final weeks, a Chancellor is always looking for small items, good news stories, like George Osborne did back in the day. This would be a great opportunity to find a capital grant scheme for match funding from philanthropic and charitable giving that would be really popular and I think welcomed across the House. I'm not going to detain colleagues much longer, but I just want to reinforce that we have to fully acknowledge the enormous contribution and value add, spiritually, socially, and looking after the most vulnerable that our church buildings provide for us. And I would call on the Minister to take to heart the cumulative effect of all that he will hear this morning, reflect on the impact that felt across our country. There's just 4 weeks until that spending review on the 11th of June. There is time for a late addition and to put a few things right. This would be a great moment. And I just want to give some thanks as well to all of those church leaders, obviously in the Anglican Church, but in all denominations, who do so much to achieve positive outcomes for people in our communities. They do that alongside a formal ministry of preaching the gospel, but the impact they make and what they speak of Jesus Christ to their communities is instrumental in the mission that they have. And I hope that we and the government can acknowledge that and assist them in the maintenance of this vast estate of church buildings, which is so important to our country.
Yeah. Also grateful to the honourable gentleman. Now, we will need to move on to front bench speeches at just before 10:30. So if colleagues can keep themselves to around 3 minutes, we may get everybody in. Bel Ribeiro.
To serve under your chairmanship. I want to start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Battersea, and the honourable member for Salisbury for bringing forward this debate and giving us the opportunity to herald the amazing contribution of churches and religious buildings in our local communities. It's not an exaggeration to say that almost every religious building offers invaluable service to its local community. We see that especially in times of national hardship, during the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, but also in everyday life. Holy Trinity, Clapham in my constituency, my honourable friends, church is a clear example of the impact churches and places of worship can have on our local community. It's the largest church of England church in the Diocese of Southwark, with around 800 worshippers each Sunday, and has tripled in size over the past decade. The work of Holy Trinity Clapham has touched so many in the community, and as you've already heard, like so many churches, they ran a significant food bank during the COVID pandemic, supporting those who were unable to afford basic goods or unable to get to supermarkets. And to carry on this work, the church has established a breakfast club which feeds approximately 200 people each week. They also run youth clubs, work with ex-offenders, put on courses for those who have suffered from domestic violence, prepare couples for marriage, and much more. Holy Trinity Clapham is not just a place of worship, it's a community hub. Members may also be intrigued to know that Holy Trinity Clapham is the church where William Wilberforce and the Clapham sect worshipped. And in continuing that legacy, Holy Trinity worked with other organisations to help tackle modern-day slavery. They've also extended their support to other churches and communities in the area, having sent teams of people from the church to help revitalise other struggling churches and communities in Brixton, Vauxhall and Mitcham. And I know both honourable members who have brought this debate forward today have expressed words of support for Holy Trinity's vision, and I'm sure they're very grateful for that. And now, to facilitate their plans to expand their work, Holy Trinity has begun a project to help make their building more suitable for modern day. And they've raised a total of £6 million, 4.5 million through donations from the congregation alone, and the remaining from successful grant applications. That's a huge amount of work already done on their own. Now, the whole project is a massive undertaking, but they've managed to raise the funds, and the works are going to be taking place over the next 12, 18 months, or so we hope. However, as you've heard, the changes to the Listed Places of Worship grant scheme have put these plans in doubt, particularly the £25,000 cap. Now, the church assumed they'd be able to recoup most of the VAT on the £6 million project, and they entered into a number of contracts on this basis, on the assumption that the scheme will continue, and now they have the prospect that they will face an extra £1 million in expenditure. Now, that's not money that the church has, it's not money that their already generous congregation has, and without finding that extra £1 million, or the government introducing an exemption for the places of worship that have already signed contracts for projects set to conclude in 2025-26, before the cap was introduced, the project will have to be brought to a temporary halt and potentially a permanent one. I'm sure you agree that would be a huge shame, and this will have hugely negative repercussions to the local community and those who rely on the church's services, but also more widely in the boroughs of Lambeth and Wandsworth, who the church were hoping to reach. Holy Trinity Clapham is not the only church that has been impacted by these changes, as you heard today. And though I think it's important to note that they serve as a very clear example of the impact this will have on the estimated 200 churches across the country whose restoration projects have been placed in jeopardy due to these changes. So I'd ask the Minister today to please tell us what plans the government has to support those churches who've already begun their restoration projects, and actually just stick to the agreement or the belief that the churches had before when they begun these projects. This morning's debate has been filled with so many shining examples of the crucial role that churches and places of worship play in their local communities, and it would be a great shame to lose that, and I hope that the Minister shares that sentiment.
Good.
Thank you, Jeremy. A pleasure to take part in this debate with you in the chair, and I congratulate the joint sponsors of the debate for obtaining this very important debate, which highlights the importance of that churches play in our local communities. And I think, just to give a few examples, that was shown only last week when we marked the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Yes, there was a grand national service across the road in Westminster Abbey, but there were civic services up and down the country to mark that occasion. I attended the one that had been arranged by the Mayor of North East Lincolnshire, and as it happens, he's a Catholic. So we attended the Catholic church last Thursday evening. And amazingly enough, whilst we were there, we heard of the election of the new Pope. Just as an aside, I would say perhaps the Catholic Church have got something to teach the Church of England in the speed that they appoint their head. We desperately need, we desperately need a head of the Church of England at this time, and that it takes a year to come up with a candidate is staggering. And I'm sure the member for Battersea has relayed that already, but I emphasise that point again. And it showed again the importance of church buildings and the role of the church within our national and civic life. And as it happens, on Sunday, it was National Fishermen's Memorial Day, and representing the area that I do, part of my constituency has a ward in Grimsby, and Grimsby, of course, is noted for fish. Sadly, the deep-sea fishing industry is no more, but there are still many people in the area who worked as trawlermen and associated work connected with the industry, and it is still vitally important to the area. And when we attended that service, Canon Mullins from Grimsby Minster drew links between VE Day and the fishing industry, and the Great West Window in Grimsby Minster contains pictures of St. Peter and the fishermen going out into the Sea of Galilee and the like. But he also drew attention to linked in with the VE Day celebrations, that in actual fact 2 bombs landed on the Minster, or St. James Church as it was then, in 1943, and every window in the church was shattered. So the original drawings did still exist, and many of the windows were recreated. But the new Westminster, as I say, in particular marked a tribute to the fishing industry. But in our local communities, you only have to go into any country church or churchyard, and it tells a story of the local community. As it happens, this weekend was in Lincolnshire was the open weekend for many churches, and I visited one on Saturday, St Mary's in Broughton. Broughton is a village just close to Scunthorpe, and I heard there from a local historian who just happens to live across the road from the church. Is extremely knowledgeable, knew virtually the history of every brick in the building. And he pointed out to me that it was one of 4 churches in Lincolnshire that predate the Norman conquest. He guided me to the evidence that showed this. Now, I was a bit disturbed by that because the church that I attend regularly in Grimsby, in Scartho, St Giles and St Matthews, has what is claimed to be an Anglo-Saxon tower dating to 1042. I pointed this out to the historian and he said, oh no, it must be at least 50 years later than that. But nevertheless, it points to the long history that the stories that the church tell of their local communities. One of those other 4 churches in Lincolnshire that was referred to as being predating the conquest is St Peter's.
Before the Chairman gets on to any more churches, can I gently point out to him he's well over his 3 minutes. This isn't a formal time limit, but I am trying to get everybody in.
Right, my apologies, Sir Jeremy. I will conclude in that case by saying that our churches and cathedrals play such an important part in our local communities. And I believe that the National Church Trust is actually conducting a survey at this time, which I would urge members to take part in and reference the importance of the churches in their local communities.
Your chairship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for Battersea in securing this important debate. Our churches and religious buildings are so much more than the stone and bricks and mortar that they're made from. But if their walls and roofs fall down, then what we lose is far greater too. In Derby, we're blessed to have churches and Sikh gurdwaras and Hindu temples and Muslim mosques. And in the middle of our city, we have our cathedral, which enters its 100th year as a cathedral next year, but whose tower dates back to the 16th century. And it is our tallest building at 212 feet, a height that's rather firmly imprinted on my memory, having abseiled from the top of it for charity alongside my then 9-year-old. But inside the tower, it has the oldest ring of bells in the world. The oldest is over 500 years old, older than the tower itself, and they peal out across the city. And at our VE Day celebration there was a commemorative peal which lasted 3 hours and was no small feat for the bell ringers, the youngest of which was 10 years old. And I think that the coming together of all ages is something that always strikes me in our churches and religious buildings. And churches in our city have got groups from the little nippers to university students coming together at St Alkmund's, or the monthly tea for older people at St Peter's. And I had lots of really interesting studies and stats about loneliness and crossing generational divides, but at 3 minutes I will have to leave those out. But we've heard from many members, and I'm sure we will hear more, that the work done in our churches so often is there to meet the wider need that we see in our communities, with food banks and community cafes and warm spaces like that at St Philip's Church in Chaddeston, to name just one. Often where we see examples of humanity at our best in looking after one another, it is in our churches and religious buildings. And nearly 80% of Church of England buildings host over 31,000 social action projects a year. And His Majesty's Treasury Green Book estimates that for every £1 invested in our church buildings, the benefit to communities is over £16. And in addition to the social action that we see in our religious buildings, they are often opened up to wider cultural events. And at Derby Cathedral, we have seen people able to hear Queen by candlelight. And again, I had a whole list of other things you can hear, but I'll have to let you look them up for yourselves. But the incredible sound of Derby Cathedral Choir fills the cathedral most days, giving moments of peace and reflection in busy lives and what feels like an uncertain world. And if I may just give one final example of the work of our church going out beyond their walls. Derby Cathedral has Music in Schools programme, which is currently working with over 900 children weekly across 17 different schools. And to hear their voices fill the cathedral creates moments in time that nourish the soul. These buildings were built with the knowledge that they would build communities and lift the health, education and culture of Derby and in every part of our country. So I would ask that the Minister ensure that all of the social good that is carried out from within the bricks and mortar, but which extend so far beyond them, are taken into account when decisions on funding are made.
Honourable members for Salisbury and Battersea for leading today's debate. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all who are gathered here today, and furthermore to all those who support the work of the APPG on freedom of religious belief, for which I am privileged and honoured and humbled to be the chair. I want to give a perspective of churches as well, impact of churches in the communities. I'm going to give you 3 countries in the world where churches are important. Churches and religious buildings have long played a central role in our communities. They are places not only of worship but of support, guidance, of service. In my constituency of Strangford, I've seen churches that run food banks, offer support to the elderly, provide youth programmes, can bring people together from across the community, including my own Baptist church in Newton Ards, and which I love and I'm grateful for all they do. These buildings serve the whole person, not just spiritually but practically. That's important that we do that. I want to focus on the first one, if I can, in Morocco, the challenges that religious buildings face around the world. The recent destruction of minarets, symbols of both religion and cultural identity, has caused great distress. These structures are much more than just buildings. They are central to the spiritual life of the community. For many Moroccans, the minaret is a sign of their faith and their history. Losing them isn't just about architecture, it's about losing part of their identity, their culture and their right to express their beliefs. Secondly, just a week or 10 days ago, I had the opportunity in a parliamentary visit to Egypt, and I want to encourage some of our Christians who are here today. I visited one of the evangelical churches in Cairo. It is a congregation of 1,800. They have 600 children that attend their services on a Sunday morning. Pastor Yusuf Samir, his words were, "It's a golden age for churches." So, Jeremy, that should be encouraging for each of us here. And when we look at across the world and see the persecution and discrimination and see a country that is trying to come to terms with that. Yeah, very happy to.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Just on the issue of that pastor who said it was a golden age for churches, unfortunately, on some occasions it's not a golden age for churches in the United Kingdom, and that we need to do more to highlight sometimes what are buildings that many people take for granted simply because of their age, their historical context, and people often put them to one side.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree with what he said. And recently, reflecting back to Egypt, to put things into perspective, Sir Jeremy, each church, irrespective of denomination, has police and army on guard 24 hours a day. But the things have changed. In 2013, churches were burnt, Christian churches, Christians were murdered. Today, the opportunities have changed, and there's going to be a new church in Upper Cairo. In Jordan, for example, we've seen churches and mosques working hand in hand to support Syrian refugees, offering shelter, food, education. These interfaith efforts, rooted in the power of religious communities and the spaces they occupy, serve as a powerful reminder of what is possible when freedom of religion or belief is respected and protected. And that includes ensuring that places of worship remain accessible, protected and supported. I leave a scripture text, Sir Jeremy, as I often do in these debates. I think it's important we do so. Isaiah 56, verse 7. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon my altar. For mine house shall be called the house of prayer for all people. This is not just a call to protect buildings. It's a call to safeguard the freedom to worship. Every individual, regardless of faith, should be able to worship freely without fear of persecution or obstruction. When these places are attacked, it's an assault on the fundamental right to practice our faith, to live according to our beliefs, and do so without fear. Let us continue to support efforts that ensure churches and other religious buildings remain places of peace, welcome and faith. And let us speak out for those whose right to worship in safety is still denied. Thank you.
Yeah. 5 more speakers, about 10 minutes, about 2 minutes each. I'm afraid. Terry Jerk.
Thank you. I'll speak quickly. Thank you very much, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. In a previous Westminster Hall debate earlier this year, I was pleased to note that there are an impressive 138 listed places of worship in my South West Norfolk constituency. I am very proud of the work they do, and they enrich our lives in so many ways. More disappointingly, however, I recently noted that I am the Labour MP with the greatest number of places of worship on the Heritage at Risk Register, 13. A reflection, I hope, on the sheer number of churches locally rather than our desire or not to look after them, I hope. Earlier this year, I was delighted that despite the difficult economic situation inherited, the government confirmed they would extend the listed places of worship grant scheme, £23 million to enable important restoration work. This includes many in my constituency have been busily coordinating their improvement plans, because churches, particularly in rural areas like my constituency, are often the very heartbeat of the community. I had a very recent example of that just a couple of weeks ago in Welney on the Norfolk and Cambridgeshire border at St Mary the Virgin Church in the village. I was pleased to join them to mark the 100th community coffee morning, an initiative started during COVID by Laura and her husband Anthony, along with Marie, Guy, Sue, Karen, Shirley and Tracy. They estimate that they've now had more than 3,000 visits, very impressive for a small village. And as nice as the cake was, and I can attest to that, more importantly, they provide a warm space in the winter, bring people together, reduce isolation and so much more, and I commend them for their efforts. It was in Welney that I heard about fen skating, and I urge you to look it up. It's a really important part of our national heritage here in South West Norfolk, and I learnt about that through the church. Whilst I may be the Labour MP with the most number of churches on the Heritage at Risk Register, second on the list is the Right Honourable Member for Holborn and St Pancras. So I suggest to the Minister gently that I'm sure the Prime Minister will be very interested in ensuring the Government continues to support churches and commits to a long-term plan for the listed places of worship scheme. Thank you.
Find out in a few minutes. A shocker, Adam.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Lewis, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Battersea and the honourable member for Salisbury. I want to be clear, these buildings that we are talking about, we are not their owners. We are simply their caretakers and custodians for a future generation. Our job is not to profit from them, but to protect them, ideally without charging them 20% for the privilege. But these places, whether they are cathedrals, churches or mosques or gurdwaras, they are much more than bricks and mortar. They are history books made out of stone, community centres made out of marble. For example, take Leicester Cathedral, a 12th century gem so ancient it gets a shout out in the Doomsday Book. It gives our town a sense of awe and a much-needed break from the concrete jungle around it. But yes, it's also home to King Richard III, who spent 500 years lying low in a car park before getting the royal treatment. And some even say that it was his reburial that triggered the greatest miracle in modern sporting history, Leicester City winning the Premier League. Was that a coincidence, or was that divine intervention? But it's not just the beauty of the backstories. These buildings serve, as so many honourable members have mentioned. That's where lonely find company, the hungry are fed. And just last week, in fact, I visited the Gita Bhavan Mandir in Clarendon Park area of my city, and the commitment to sustainability in the environment was much more progressive than half the tech startups in Shoreditch. Or take the local Gurdwara, the Guru Amar Das, which serves hundreds of meals daily, and with no question asks. In fact, the only question they ask is, do you want some more? Which is, the answer is always yes. And this unity, this service crosses boundary. I am a Muslim. I volunteer for a Sikh charity, which is the Midlands Langar Seva Society, that operates out of a church, serving people of all faiths and no faiths. And it's what community looks like, what Britain looks like, and it's not an island of strangers. So can I ask the ministers, let's put a price, we can't really put a price on these things, so let's not be the generation that tax them, but a generation that funds them for our future generations, so that beauty, service and spiritual refuge deserves relief and not receipts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'll keep my remarks fairly short. As many in the chamber today will know, churches in my constituency are much more than just places of worship. They're vital hubs for community cohesion and provide crucial resilience in the face of events like Storm Airwin, Storm Arwen, particularly for the most rural parts of the constituency. They're marks of local identity and symbols of the rich history that Northumberland and the North East and Newcastle have to offer. Northumberland is often called the cradle of Christianity due to Holy Island and Lindisfarne, but I think members will appreciate that, in my view, the west of the county has far more to offer than the coast. I know my honourable friend from North Northumberland is not here. And we benefit greatly from that religious history. We see a great amount of tourism coming. We also see huge amounts of involvement with local communities, and I'm thinking of organisations and churches that operate throughout the Tyne Valley and throughout the more rural parts of the constituency, particularly the Holy Cross Anglican Church in Haltwhistle, St Mary the Virgin in Throckley, and St Mary Magdalene in Prudder, as well as Hexham Abbey, which is one of the most iconic buildings that my constituency has to offer and that the North East has to offer. Not just because I'll be getting married there later this year, but also because there's been a church on that site for about 1,300 years. For anyone interested in history, it's been there since Queen Etheldrada made a gift of lands to Wilfrid, the Bishop of York, in roughly 674 AD. But the constituency is home to more than just Hexham Abbey. The village of Bywell has, it's the only village in England with 2 surviving Anglo-Saxon churches. And in Bellingham, St Cuthbert's has been attracting worshippers for over 800 years, dating back to at least the 13th century. These churches are not simply relics, they are not simply attractions, they are not simply bits of our history that have sort of seen their day and are now sort of merely decorations. They are the beating heart of our communities. They provide for a community spirit that I think is unparalleled elsewhere in the world in Northumberland, and I'm tremendously proud to represent all of them. And I should also say that they really do provide a crucial venue for things like hosting constituency office surgeries and getting out and meeting with individual members of the community. Thank you.
Adam Dowds.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. Yeovil has some truly beautiful religious buildings. Polling amongst the general public supports this, with 75% of people agreeing that church buildings are important for society. Holy Trinity runs a baby bank supporting 3 to 4 families each week with essential items of newborns such as nappies and baby grows. The church also has a thriving eco-garden cared for by volunteers. St John's has the Gone Fishing Cafe, which is very popular in the community. This also hosts Christians Against Poverty once a week, providing support services. Amongst half of all Grade 1 listed buildings in England are historic churches. Over 900 churches are at risk according to Historic England Heritage Register. This is why the listed place of worship grant scheme for churches repair is so important. The scheme has allowed congregations of all faith to recover the value-added tax costs for vital repairs to their listed buildings, making it the most universal and accessible source of relief. I was glad to see that following the public pressure, the government extended the scheme into March 26, but with a lower cap of £25,000 towards repair costs. I'd also like to thank the Minister for writing to me to confirm this following my early day motion on the topic. However, I am concerned about the introduction of the cap and urge the government to make sure that the existing claims should be honoured under the previous agreement where no cap existed. In conclusion, and good, I'm under time, churches are not just for the faithful but for all communities, whether it's local groups and clubs, charity workers and the vulnerable people, celebrating weddings, christenings and mourning the passing of loved ones. Religious buildings will play an important role in key movements throughout our lives, bringing us together as a community. This is why we must do all we can to support these fantastic buildings as cornerstones of our British society and culture.
Hear, hear. It's the honourable gentleman for his brevity, as I'm sure is Brian Matthew.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and also to the honourable members for Salisbury and Battersea. For over 20 years, the government has run the Listed Places of Worship grant scheme, which allows listed churches, chapels and other listed places of worship to reclaim VAT on the cost of repair. This grant scheme has been regularly renewed every few years, and it needs to be again in full if we are to allow communities to keep what is often their heart and soul in good order, and in doing so keep the communities themselves healthy. Reduction of this scheme would be a disaster for listed places of worship. Nearly half of all Grade 1 buildings in England are churches. These buildings are largely run by volunteers who have to raise the funds needed for repairs. The ability to reclaim VAT on these works makes an enormous difference, particularly at a time when costs of all building work have increased substantially. Historic churches are not only places of spiritual importance, but also architectural and cultural landmarks. They offer a window into our past, reflecting the diversity of our communities and our shared history. Historic churches also do a tremendous amount to support local communities, often hosting or helping to run services such as food banks, youth clubs and drug and addiction support, which contribute to health and social welfare right across our country, from rural idylls to inner city neighbourhoods. Without this scheme, many of those historically and architecturally significant buildings will quite simply face neglect, even closure. This would not only have a severe negative effect on local communities, inevitably impacting the most deprived communities the most, but also result in a loss of this hugely significant heritage. By continuing the listed places of worship grant scheme, the government can ensure that these treasures are protected for future generations as places which protect beauty, promote beauty, education, community cohesion and tourism. In my own constituency of Melksham and Devizes, I have received 40 letters from 24 church communities. Their names are quintessential to what makes up the best of our nation, and it should be celebrated and visited and utilised, because that is what they were built for in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I thank all colleagues for their cooperation and self-discipline? We come now to the front bench speakers, beginning with the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable members for Battersea and Salisbury for securing this important debate. Now, as a Liberal Democrat, I am, of course, primarily interested in the fixing of church roofs, as the Leader of the Opposition has so keenly pointed out. So it is a pleasure to take part in today's debate, and I take that statement from the Leader of the Opposition as a compliment, actually, because that is about showing interest in your community, and that is what we've all displayed so far today during this debate. Across the United Kingdom, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples and other places of worship have long stood at the heart of our communities. They are not just architectural landmarks, they are vital living institutions. They are the people that make them. They are the anchor points of community life, and today more than ever they remain places of refuge, of service and of solidarity. Historically, churches have provided more than spiritual guidance, although that is of course their primary service. They funded hospitals, they built schools and supported the most vulnerable long before the modern welfare state. They were, and they still are, the institutions to which many of us turn first in times of hardship and crisis. Today, their role has evolved. The 40,000 churches across our country offer mental health services, youth clubs, after-school programmes, warm spaces. Churches are responsible for running the majority of food banks in the UK. They often step in where the state has stepped back. Before the pandemic, churches and other places of worship were coordinating around 35,000 social action projects. That included 8,000 food banks, 4,000 parent and toddler groups, more upon that later, 2,600 breakfast clubs, 2,400 night shelters for homeless people. Around 2.6 million people in the UK sought help from churches during the cost of living crisis, the majority for food, but a significant number to access a warm space too. These are extraordinary numbers. They represent not just acts of charity, but the fabric of care that bind our communities together, thanks to the dedication of the religious institutions that continue to serve them. Now, I know this from personal experience. Prior to my election last summer, I was a full-time dad, and I think I'm the only newly elected MP who was a full-time dad in the lead-up to my election. I regularly joined the Highbury Congregational Church playgroup, just round the corner from my house, and Little Notes baby music class at St Mark's with my daughter. And I'm particularly thankful for the role that those two churches have played in our family life. I'd also like to say thank you to the religious groups who support our most vulnerable in my town. At St Michael's Church in Wadden, the Cornerstone Centre plays a vital role looking after people who need a bit of extra to get by, ably supported by the Reverend James White, who is a truly wonderful man. It also hosts community counselling services to help people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. I've seen this work in action, I've visited, and I've seen the responses of the people who use those services, and it is truly moving to see the change that they can stimulate in people who need it. Now, at St Gregory's Catholic Church, and among those who attend the Quaker Meeting House in Cheltenham, there's a community working very hard to support refugees and asylum seekers. They don't ask for our thanks, but they deserve it in bucket loads.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I'd like to thank the honourable members for securing this debate and the honourable gentleman for giving way. I know that he is also a big fan of soft play centres, So will he join me in thanking the deans, priests and vicars of Brecon Cathedral, St Mary's Church, Brecon, Kensington Church, Brecon and St David's Llanfaes? Unfortunately, I can't name all of the churches and religious institutions in my constituency for providing soft play centres that are much needed and much appreciated by local residents, and thanking them for all of the other services they provide to young parents in our communities.
Absolutely. As the parent of a toddler, soft play is a vital service that I use myself, and I'm sure in his vast constituency there are far more soft play centres in the various churches all around it, and I join him in saying thank you. So I was saying the individuals who volunteer, they deserve our thanks. They never asked for it. But there is also the point about the church as an economic driver. Anglican cathedrals alone contribute £235 million to local economies and support around 6,000 full-time jobs. The tourists visiting these historic sites, not the Tories, although I'm sure they like to visit churches too, they spend an extra £128 million per year. The heritage value of these buildings is a testament not only to the faith of Britain, but to our enduring cultural history. In my own constituency in the centre, Cheltenham Minster is our oldest building. It's over 850 years old. It now sits next to one of our newest buildings, the Minster Exchange development, which is a hub for tech and cyber businesses. That Cheltenham's oldest building sits next to businesses at the forefront of modern technology is a testament to the enduring social utility of these religious spaces throughout the ages. That's why it should concern us that so many churches, more than 900 as I understand it, are on Historic England's Heritage at Risk register, and the repair bill that the Church of England sits on of more than £1 billion is a matter of huge concern for the cultural life of our nation. Now, we welcome the government's recent decision to extend the listed places of worship grant scheme until 2026. That's good news, and we seek, hopefully, confirmation that it will be renewed after that. But we do remain concerned that the new £25,000 cap may limit the effectiveness, and we believe that outstanding claims under the previous uncapped arrangement should be honoured. We're also concerned about the long-term sustainability of these institutions. In the past decade, more than 3,500 churches have closed in the UK. In Scotland, 40% of churches are at risk of closure, and in Wales, nearly a quarter have already shut their doors. This isn't just about religion, it's about community life, and we ignore the value of that at our peril.
Thank you very much. I call the opposition spokesperson, Saki Bhatti.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve in your chairmanship, and I welcome the Church Estates Commission's support for this debate and securing it, and of course my honourable friend, the member for Salisbury. I thank the Second Church Estates Commission for all that she does for churches and for making such an eloquent speech and argument for this debate. And my honourable friend from Salisbury highlighted the very important role that churches play in the communities, especially when it comes to leadership. And I thank both members for making a case around Holy Trinity Clapham Church. Mr Jeremy, last week we celebrated VE Day up and down the country, and I was struck once more by the many references to community and spirit that came with the day's events. And in a number of cases, of course, this related to street parties and dancing, but frequently parish churches, chapels, cathedrals and ministers were mentioned as playing an important community role both 80 years ago and today. Indeed, I myself attended a moving beacon lighting service at Elmdon Church in my own constituency, where I was privileged to meet with a 96-year-old veteran ex-para Frank Spencer, whose charitable endeavours actually included jumping out of a plane at the age of 92, and perhaps an idea for the honourable member for Derby North if she wants to graduate from abseiling down churches. With the peal of bells echoing throughout the country as part of a nationally coordinated effort, it was clear how important churches and religious buildings are to local people. For many of these people, their real-world experience of places of worship is not the grandeur of St. Peter's or St. Paul's, but often an ancient yet parochial building or hall used as a meeting place or hired venue for birthdays, or soft play centres has been already alluded to, or a space offering some quiet time at Christmas or at Easter for reflection and a sense of something deeper. In other communities, they open doors of the local synagogue or the mosque or temples, which fulfil a similar function and sit just as prominently and importantly within local life. Just a few weeks ago, I visited the Balsall Common Parkinson's Cafe at the Balsall Common Methodist Church, where I met a 30-strong community group committed to helping people with Parkinson's. Crucially, the church had offered this venue for free of charge, providing the group with an invaluable space to give support to local people in navigating the complexities of life for people living with Parkinson's. And equally, over this last cold winter, with the government's cut of the winter fuel payment, there was churches, an army of churches and other places of worship who played a vital role in providing safe and warm spaces for those in the cold. This included 485 Church of England churches alone. And this comes alongside the countless donations of food and clothes made to communities, from communities via places of worship every year. And this was a point made by the member for Battersea very eloquently. And I want to thank all of our places of worship, especially our churches, for all that they do. For many churches, however, in particular, the future of these schemes looks far bleaker than they perhaps expected. Whilst many may be celebrating the election of the 267th Supreme Pontiff, and I send my warmest congratulations to Pope Leo XIV, or they might be getting ready to welcome a new Archbishop of Canterbury, and I'm less brave than my honourable friend for Brigg and Immingham, so I won't be commenting on church affairs. But hundreds of these churches will also be looking to the future, and they will probably be less readily thankful to the government's cut to the much-valued listed places of worship grant scheme. The scheme has been a lifeline for many churches and other places of worship seeking essential and fundamental repairs to their buildings by helping to cover the VAT incurred on repair costs within certain limits. And I'll focus somewhat on churches here because Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register found that there were 969 places of worship at risk in 2024, of which 959 were churches. Indeed, in between 2023 and 2024, 55 places of worship alone were added to the list. And looking nationally, the Church of England, the established Church in England, and the Mother Church of Global Anglican Communion has itself a backlog of repairs to churches estimated at over £1 billion, with an annual repair bill of around 150 million. Mr Chairman, confronted with these worrying statistics, you'd think that the Department for Culture, Media and Sport would be working tirelessly to ease such a burden on places of worship. Unfortunately, you'd be wrong, as the government's response to the repairs crisis has been one of delay, confusion and cuts. After leaving these community assets in the dark by continuously delaying an announcement on the scheme's future, the government finally came to this place to confirm the fears of many. Cuts to the scheme and cuts to the lifeline of many of our most historic churches and places of worship. And as I've previously mentioned in this chamber, many of my constituents in Meriden and Solihull East have also told me about their concerns for some of the most beloved places of worship. One told me that it would be a disaster for listed places of worship, and that the ability to reclaim VAT makes an enormous difference, particularly at a time when the cost of building work has increased substantially. It's an argument that's been made throughout this debate by many members. As Sir Philip Rutnam, Chairman of the National Churches Trust, said in a statement after funding for the scheme was slashed, the scheme simply does not provide enough certainty or support to churches who need more time to plan and deliver repairs. We strongly believe that the scheme should be made permanent. It is vital to help these buildings stay open, serve local people, and it's the poorest and the most isolated who will suffer most if these buildings are forced to close. Indeed, it is most notable that Sir Philip highlights that local people, indeed communities, will suffer if places of worship are forced into shutting their doors for good by the miserly actions of a government way out of its economic depth. Furthermore, this all comes despite the fact that the scheme offers tremendous value for money. As the National Churches Trust has shown, for every pound invested in a church, £16 of social good is generated. So, Mr Chairman, I call on the government to ensure that this is the end of the dithering, that this is the final time that they leave our communities and our community assets in the dark. The Minister must confirm if the government plans to continue the scheme beyond the one-year extension that they have confirmed, an extension which does next to nothing for the confidence of impacted buildings and communities. The government must work to protect our national heritage with pride, not leave them crumbling in the dark shadow of bureaucratic delays. And I gently say to the Minister, opposition often asks the government to stand for something. So I pose the question, why not stand for our churches?
Call the Minister, Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and good morning to everybody in the room today. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for Salisbury for securing this debate, and my honourable friend, the Member for Battersea and the Second Churches Estate Commissioner for tailoring today's debate, and also for the significant work that she does. In my remarks, I'd like to respond to some of the points raised by honourable members and to set out the government's position on this topic. Given the subject of our debate, it seems fitting to begin by reflecting on some of the religious terminology. I understand among Christian communities, it's common to remind one another that biblically, the church refers not only to a physical building, but to a gathering of people assembled, united by their Christian faith. Nevertheless, for most, the word church invites images of Christian places of worship, whether they be the Gothic cathedrals in the Shire counties, or the churches which make up many towns and cities across the country, across all denominations, which were built not just as places of worship, but as anchors of the communities that they serve. They serve not only the spiritual needs of the community, but also the social needs too. And many would stand in support of the local school, community hall and more. And for many, including in my own town of Oldham, they would be buildings of note, and they would give status and heritage which has stood for generations. And like the many modern parish churches on estates around the country, town planners would often draw up the ideal community with local schools, shops, pubs, and alongside them places of worship. They were always seen as being integral to a community thriving. But we also know that church buildings are often places that welcome through their doors not just Christians, but those of all faiths and none, because they are the wider anchor to the community. This can equally be said of places of worship belonging to other faiths and belief communities, whether they be mosques, synagogues, gurdwaras or temples. The public service and care for neighbour enacted by faith and belief groups doesn't just happen with the words, but also in actions, in their service and in care for others, often very practical and grounded in the place where they live and represent. And this brings us to the particular focus of this debate, the importance and the impact of religious buildings in communities. With an estimated 40,300 churches in the UK, according to the National Churches Trust, plus many other places of worship belonging to other faiths and beliefs, the invaluable contribution of religious buildings to the built landscape of our nation cannot be overstated. I know my honourable friend in the other place, Lord Calm, the Minister for Faith, has made more than 120 visits since last July, including numerous visits to places of worship and seeing firsthand how they serve their communities. Only last week, my honourable friend, the Minister for Faith, spoke at the Shah Jahanna Mosque in Woking, marking the E-Day and the sacrifice of Muslim soldiers in defence of our country. The mosque, built in 1889, is the oldest purpose-built mosque in the country. Or the Guru Nanak Nisham Sawar Jawa Gurdwara in Birmingham, visited by the Minister of State in December, built in the 1970s, following the arrival of Sikhs from India and East Africa. The Nishkam campus includes not only a place of worship, but also a school, a health centre, a social enterprise that also serves the local community and all members of the community, regardless of their faith. And we've heard numerous examples of how religious buildings are being used to build more compassionate and more resilient communities. For instance, I can think of a number of churches and mosques and temples in my own area that reach out to offer support to the homeless, offer food banks and do an amazing amount of charity work. And we've heard about the services for older people, for younger people, for marginalised groups who are based out of these religious buildings, from food banks and community kitchens to vaccination centres and now modern family hubs. And may I add the work that my own department funds through the Near Neighbours Cohesion Programme, often operating out of places of worship and bringing together from diverse backgrounds to collaborate together on initiatives that improve the local community where they live. And I should say, sadly, because these buildings do matter, they can also become the focus of hate by those who would want to seek to sow division in our communities. And we saw that in the wake of the tragedies in Southport last summer, that it was a local mosque that became the target of thugs participating in violent disorder. Now, what these criminals did not anticipate was the response of local people, Muslim and many non-Muslims alike, to protect and rebuild that mosque. But protecting religious buildings from violence cannot just be the responsibility of local citizens. The government is committed to protecting the right of individuals to freely practice their religion at their chosen place of worship and making sure that our streets and our communities are safe. This is particularly important at a time when attacks on synagogues and mosques in the UK and worldwide, in fact, have risen. In 2025-26, up to £50.9 million is available to protect faith communities and their places of worship. This includes £18 million through the Jewish Community Protective Security Grant, £29.4 million through the Protective Security for Mosque Scheme and for security at Muslim faith schools, and £3.5 million for the places of worship and associated faith community centres of all faiths. But we know that these measures, whilst vital, don't necessarily address the deep-seated issues that lead to the need for such protections to be in place in the first place. Indeed, we all wish, I'm sure, that they weren't needed at all, which is why my department is leading the cross-government effort to develop a long-term, more strategic approach to community cohesion, working in partnership with communities and local stakeholders, including faith and belief groups, to rebuild, to renew, and to address the deep-seated issues. Now, as part of this ambition, the government recently announced a plan for neighbourhoods, £1.5 billion to invest in 75 areas over the next decade, highlighting the government's commitment to repairing fractured communities, bringing people back together, and ensuring that people see a visible difference and improvement in their communities. Local neighbourhood boards will provide a space for community representations, which could include those from faith and belief communities, to help shape how this funding is delivered through their local neighbourhood. This could include discussions on the role of places of worship in serving their local communities. Religious buildings help make up not just the physical, but also the social fabric of our nation. They are a record of our history, they are a resource for our present, and an asset for the future. And that is why this government has continued to fund the listed places of worship scheme. It was due to the difficult fiscal circumstances that this government inherited that the scheme's budget was reduced from £23 million to £23 million from April 25. Despite this, evidence from previous years suggests that this should meet the demand, with 94% of applications being under £25,000 and over 70% of applications being under £5,000. It's worth noting that there's also a range of support via DCMS and the department's arm's length bodies that support listed places of worship. For instance, the National Lottery Heritage Fund has committed to investing around £100 million between 2023 and 2026 to support places of worship. In exceptional circumstances, listed places of worship may also be eligible for the Heritage at Risk funding by Historic England, and DCMS announced an additional £15 million for 25-26 in February 25. The Churches Conservation Trust also funds repairs and maintenance of over 350 churches in its portfolio. Moreover, town and parish councils are civil local authorities, and in this capacity, they may choose to support the upkeep of religious buildings as they support the development of other community assets. In addition to the critical day-to-day work of providing spaces that help meet the needs of local people, churches and religious buildings are also often host to occasions of national commemoration and celebration. Take, for example, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, His Majesty the King's coronation, or services of remembrance in every community across the country. Moments when religious buildings become sites of history and also stir the nation's collective soul. This has been movingly evident through the images of St. Peter Basilica in Rome over the last few days and weeks. Great crowds gathering to pay their respects to the late Pope Francis, and scenes of jubilant celebration to mark the election of Pope Leo XIV. And so I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member and Honourable Members for bringing forward and for participating in this debate, and for the opportunity to demonstrate...
Before the Minister closes, will he give way?
Of course. Yeah.
And I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way, and he is making a good speech in terms of his in responding to this debate. But on the 3 points that I raised at the opening of this debate, in relation to making the scheme permanent, but also finding prioritising support for those schemes that are already underway, as well as looking at a capital fund, will he be speaking to those points and responding to those specific points?
Yeah, so I did my best to outline the range of different funding that is available to local churches and places of worship, of which this fund is one of a number. Just on the particular points about the continuation of the fund that she mentioned in her own contribution, of course, any matter of future funding members will appreciate is a matter for the spending review, and every department across government will make a submission to that.
Of course, the Minister is absolutely right in what he's just said, but he will also be very aware that within the budgets that he is responsible for, there will be capital underspends in year, and there will be an opportunity for him to make the case to his Secretary of State, to the Treasury, to say, well, should some of that underspend be allocated to these works that are in progress, the 260 projects that anticipated that VAT return that they don't have. There will be that opportunity. I would urge him to consider that. It seems to be a very savvy and politically sensible way of proceeding, and would give him a lot of credit.
Well, I mean, what I can say is that the passion and the enthusiasm, and also the commitment, I think, from all members about just how important these places of worship are, not just in terms of their historical status that they give to a place in terms of belonging and sense of pride, but also how they act as a community anchor for the future, is absolutely appreciated. And our wider plan and our wider work in terms of the plan for neighbourhoods, that £1.5 billion that we announced, and also the wider work we're doing, for instance, on community ownership, is all part of that too. And I know in my own constituency, the Holy Rosary Church that was built in 1955, unfortunately, has now closed. But you would think for a 1955 church, it would actually be quite mundane in its feel. But it has a significant Grade 2 listed memorial in that church, designed by George Maver Martin, which is a significant focal point for that community. And so we are working at a local level to see how we can marshal funds from different places. And I only say that to give an example, to say, and everyone in this room will know this in their own community, it is never just one fund that provides the answer to the question. It's about blending different funding streams together in the end to make these schemes add up. But the importance that members have given to these local schemes is absolutely appreciated and supported by this government. And to address directly his question about will we be looking at capital underspends in this regard, I can say that we will do that in the round. And across all of the range of interventions that the government will take to support local communities, that I will certainly take back the enthusiasm from this debate and make the point to other ministers in DCMS and also the Minister for Faith too, who I'm sure will be hearing this debate as we speak today. And in a way, I think we finish where we started, which is to recognise through the contributions that members have made here just how important these buildings are, of course, as places of worship, and that has a very important role to play in our society, but also as places to convene, places for people of all faiths and no faith to be able to get the support that they need to be able to live a decent, fulfilled life in their community. Thank you.
Thank you, the Minister. About 3 minutes, if she wants them. I call Marcia Cordova to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy, and I think members across this room will all agree that this has been a very good-spirited debate. It hasn't been party political because churches and places of worship are present in all of our constituencies. But we've heard some really good examples of just the significant role and impact that our listed places have, whether that's providing a breakfast club, a warm space, or wonderful musical recitals. And I really feel like I need to be invited to Derby Cathedral at some point. But I will say, just really importantly, that the government cannot afford to not act to ensure that these places are protected. And so I do hope that the Minister will be taking this back. But I also want to thank my right honourable friend for Salisbury for co-sponsoring this debate together. I think it shows a real good spirit of how we can work cross-party on issues of common interest. I would also like to thank the members for Clapham and Brixton Hill. She made a wonderful speech in relation to the importance of our church, Holy Trinity Clapham, and they were a thread throughout this entire debate. But also the member for Brigg and Immingham, yes, I will take that back, about the speed at which we appoint our Archbishop, as well as Derby North, Strangford, South West Norfolk, Leicester South, and let's hope one day Leicester will be back in the Premier League, is all I will say there. Not least for my own family interest, I should say there. Yeovil, Melksham and Devizes, but also the interventions for the members for Farnham and Boston, Totteridge and Tiverstone, Christchurch, Tiverton and Minehead, Bridgewater, East Londonderry and Carlisle. But finally, I would like to thank the many church leaders for their leadership, for their selfless service and for just the incredible work that they are doing in our communities and our constituencies up and down the country. But also thank you to each and every member that spoke today, but also those members that continue to raise this issue, this very important issue. Here.
I add my thanks to the Honourable Lady and to all those who've participated in this debate. So the question is, that this House has considered the impact of churches and religious buildings on communities. As many as are of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.